In the early dawn, the quiet village was still asleep as Xia flowed through her martial arts routine. Each movement was flawless, a precise combination of grace and power. Her small frame hid years of rigorous kung fu training, a discipline passed down from her father, who had once been one of the greatest masters in the region. Now, Xia carried on his legacy, a silent warrior whose skills far surpassed her appearance. Xia lived a quiet life with her younger brother, Wei, who was the light of her world. Where Xia was reserved and disciplined, Wei was joyful, a burst of energy who brightened every room he entered. They had lost their parents young, leaving Xia to take on the role of protector, mentor, and guardian. She had trained tirelessly in kung fu to ensure that no harm would come to her or her brother. In her heart, she was Wei's shield. Yet recently, Xia noticed a shift in Wei's demeanor. He was no longer the carefree boy she had always known. His once cheerful laughter was replaced with silence, his playful banter now tinged with unease. Xia had asked him repeatedly what was wrong, but he never told her. He didn't want to worry her, but his sister sensed something was terribly wrong. Unbeknownst to Xia, Wei had become the target of Zhang and his gang of bullies at school. Zhang was infamous for his cruelty, using fear and intimidation to maintain his status as the school's top thug. To someone like Zhang, Wei's kindness was a weakness to exploit. The torment had started small, petty insults and sneers in the hallways, but had grown more vicious over time. Wei never told Xia about the bullying, hoping to handle it on his own, but it had become unbearable. The gang had started waiting for him after school, cornering him behind the gym where no one could see. Every day, their taunts grew more aggressive, their physical abuse more intense. One fateful afternoon, Zhang and his gang pushed Wei too far. The group surrounded him, mocking his every move, calling him weak, useless. Wei tried to brush off their words and walk away, but Zhang wasn't satisfied with just words. He wanted to see Wei suffer. As Wei turned to leave, Zhang shoved him hard. Wei stumbled backward, his foot catching on a piece of debris. His head hit the ground with a sickening crack, and for a moment, everything was silent. The gang stared at Wei, realizing that something had gone horribly wrong. Blood began to pool beneath his head, and his body lay motionless. In a panic, Zhang and his friends ran, leaving Wei behind, broken and alone. Xia was in the kitchen preparing dinner when the call came. It was the school principal, his voice trembling as he delivered the news. Wei had been found unconscious behind the gym, severely injured. He was being rushed to the hospital, but it didn't look good. Xia felt her world collapse in that instant. She dropped everything and raced to the hospital, her heart pounding in her chest. When she arrived, she found Wei, hooked up to machines, his face pale, his body still. The doctors told her that he had sustained severe head trauma. They did everything they could, but the damage was too great. Wei didn't survive the night. Xia sat beside his hospital bed, numb with grief. Her little brother, the boy she had sworn to protect, was gone. She had failed him. The guilt was overwhelming, a crushing weight that left her breathless. How had she not seen the signs? Why hadn't he come to her for help? These questions gnawed at her, but none of them mattered now. Wei was gone, and nothing could bring him back. In the days that followed, Xia learned the truth. Wei had been bullied by Zhang and his gang for months, and it was they who had been responsible for his death. The school gave Zhang and his friends a slap on the wrist, a suspension that barely lasted a week. The police investigated, but without witnesses or evidence, the case went cold. Justice, it seemed, would not come for Wei. That was when something shifted in Xia. The grief that had consumed her gave way to something darker, anger. A deep, burning rage that threatened to consume her. She had always trained for self-defense, for protection, but now her training would serve a different purpose. She would not allow Wei's death to go unanswered. Zhang and his gang would pay for what they had done. In the days after Wei's death, Xia went through the motions of life like a ghost. She attended school, her expression blank, her eyes hollow. No one suspected the fire that raged inside her, the storm of vengeance building in her heart. She had spent her whole life learning discipline, control, and restraint. But now, she felt those principles slipping away. What good were they if they couldn't protect the one she loved? Every night, after her usual training, Xia would sit alone in her room, planning. She knew Zhang and his gang's schedules, their hiding spots, their favorite hangouts. It wouldn't be hard to find them. The hard part would be resisting the urge to tear them apart the moment she saw them. A week later, Xia made her move. She followed Zhang and his gang after school, watching from a distance as they laughed and joked as if they hadn't murdered her brother. They made their way to an old, abandoned warehouse near the outskirts of town, a place they frequented to smoke and hide from authority. Xia moved silently through the shadows, her mind focused, her heart cold. She didn't care about the consequences anymore. All that mattered was justice for Wei. Zhang stood at the center of the group, laughing with his friends, completely unaware of the predator stalking him. Xia waited, her breath steady, her body tense, ready to strike. And then, she stepped out of the shadows. Zhang and his gang were too absorbed in their banter to notice the subtle shift in the air. The warehouse was dimly lit by a few weak light bulbs hanging from the ceiling, casting long, distorted shadows across the cold cement floor. Xia's approach was soundless, her figure blending into the darkness as if she were part of it. Every muscle in her body was tense but controlled. She had learned to become one with her surroundings through years of kung fu training, her father's voice echoing in her mind, "Only strike when the time is right. Let the enemy be unaware until it is too late." Zhang turned around, his eyes widening when he saw her step into the light. For a moment, he didn't recognize her. To him, she was just another face at school, always quiet and unremarkable. But there was something different about her now. Her eyes, cold as steel, boring into him with an intensity that made his chest tighten. "Oh, look who it is." Zhang sneered, masking his sudden unease with arrogance. His friends glanced at him, amused but cautious. "Wei's little sister. What do you want? Huh? Come to cry about your brother?" The others laughed, their voices cruel and mocking. Xia stood silently, her hands hanging loosely at her sides. Her heart was steady, her pulse calm. She had made her decision. There would be no turning back now. "I'm not here to cry," Xia said, her voice low and measured. "I'm here to end this." Her words hung in the air, their weight slowly sinking into the minds of Zhang and his gang. A flicker of confusion passed over Zhang's face before he scoffed. "And what? What are you gonna do? You think you can take us on by yourself?" He stepped closer, trying to intimidate her with his towering height. Xia didn't flinch. She had waited long enough. The moment Zhang took another step, Xia moved. It was like watching lightning strike. Her body, once still, exploded into action. She closed the distance between them in a blink, delivering a swift, calculated kick to his midsection. The force of it sent Zhang stumbling back, gasping for air. He hadn't even seen her coming. "What the hell?" one of Zhang's friends shouted, rushing towards Xia with fists raised. But she was ready. Before he could even swing, Xia dodged to the side, her movements fluid and effortless. Her hand struck the bully's shoulder with pinpoint precision, and with a quick twist, she dislocated it. He screamed in agony, collapsing to the floor. Chaos erupted. The other boys rushed her, their aggression wild and uncoordinated. But Xia was calm, her training kicking in like second nature. Years of practicing martial arts had honed her reflexes, making her faster and stronger than they could ever imagine. She moved through them like a phantom, her strikes landing with deadly accuracy. Each punch, kick, and block was perfectly timed, breaking bones and bringing them to the ground in seconds. The gang, once so full of bravado, was now reduced to a group of broken, groaning bodies sprawled across the warehouse floor. Xia stood in the center, untouched, her breath even and her gaze unwavering. She hadn't broken a sweat. Zhang, clutching his chest where Xia had first struck him, struggled to his feet, eyes wide with fear. He had underestimated her. No, he had no idea who she really was. You freak," he gasped, trying to stand tall despite the pain coursing through him. "You're insane." Xia stepped forward, her expression unreadable. I warned you." She grabbed Zhang by the collar, pulling him closer until their faces were inches apart. His breath hitched in his throat. For the first time in his life, Zhang was truly afraid. "You killed my brother," Xia whispered, her voice cold and emotionless. "This is justice." With a final, bone-crushing punch to his jaw, Zhang crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The silence that followed was deafening. Xia stood amidst the wreckage of Zhang's gang, her heart racing not from the fight, but from the emotions swirling inside her. She had thought that this would bring her peace, that avenging Wei's death would somehow heal the gaping wound left in her heart. But as she looked down at Zhang and his friends, their bodies broken and defeated, she felt hollow. The night had fallen darker than before, and the chill in the air seemed to seep into Xia's very bones. She walked away from the warehouse without a backward glance, leaving the bullies to their fate. They would survive. She had made sure not to deliver any fatal blows. But they would remember this night for the rest of their lives. They would remember the girl they had underestimated, the girl who had become their worst nightmare. As Xia made her way through the deserted streets back to her small home, the weight of her actions began to settle on her shoulders. Her body was fine, trained and conditioned to withstand the physical toll of battle, but her mind was heavy with the reality of what she had done. She had taken justice into her own hands, but at what cost? She had become the storm she had spent her entire life learning to control. When Xia reached her front door, she hesitated. The house was empty without Wei. Every corner, every room held memories of him. The lightness he had brought to her life was gone, leaving only shadows and silence. Inside, Xia sat on her bed, staring at the framed photo of her and Wei taken just months before his death. His smile, so bright and full of life, seemed to mock her now. She had avenged him, yes, but it didn't feel like a victory. She still felt as lost and broken as the day he had died. Days turned into weeks, and the story of what had happened to Zhang and his gang spread like wildfire through the school. No one knew who had beaten them so brutally, and Xia made sure to keep her involvement hidden. She continued attending classes, keeping her head down, her expression as blank as ever. But inside, the storm still raged. Without Wei, Xia felt adrift. She had spent so long training to protect him, to be his guardian, that now, without him, she didn't know what to do. Her father's teachings had always emphasized balance and control, but she had thrown those lessons aside in her quest for vengeance. She had embraced the fury that had built inside her, but now it was eating away at her from the inside out. One afternoon, as Xia wandered the school grounds, lost in thought, she heard the familiar sounds of children playing nearby. Curious, she followed the noise to the school's courtyard, where a group of younger students were practicing martial arts under the guidance of a teacher. The students were clumsy and awkward, their movements slow and imprecise. But there was a spark of enthusiasm in their eyes, a joy that reminded Xia of Wei. For the first time in weeks, Xia felt something stir inside her. Watching the students struggle and stumble through their lessons, she realized that her knowledge, her training, could be used for something more than vengeance. She could pass on what she had learned, not just the physical aspects of Kung Fu, but the discipline, the control, the wisdom that had once guided her. The next day, Xia approached the teacher and offered to help. At first, he was hesitant. After all, Xia had always been so quiet and reserved. But after watching her demonstrate a few basic techniques, he eagerly accepted her offer. Xia began training the students after school, her presence commanding respect and attention. She was strict but fair, pushing the students to be better, to understand the art of Kung Fu in its entirety, not just the fighting. As the weeks passed, Xia found herself healing in ways she hadn't expected. Teaching gave her purpose, a reason to keep going. She saw bits of Wei in every student, their laughter, their determination, their struggles, and it filled the void his death had left behind. For the first time since Wei's passing, Xia began to feel a sense of peace. Months passed, and Xia's reputation as a Kung Fu teacher spread beyond the school grounds. Her class grew in size as students from different neighborhoods came to learn from her. She taught them not just the art of fighting, but the essence of control and discipline. How to channel their energy into something constructive rather than destructive. Her students respected her not just for her skill, but for the calm strength she exhibited, a force that resonated deeply with them. One afternoon, as Xia was wrapping up a lesson, a stranger approached her from across the courtyard. He was tall and muscular, with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. He wore a black leather jacket, and his eyes scanned the training area with disdain. The students, sensing his presence, quieted down and looked toward Xia for guidance. "You're Xia, right?" the man asked, his voice smooth but laced with condescension. "The girl who beat up Zhang and his gang." Xia's expression didn't change. She remained calm, her eyes focused on him. "I am Xia, and you are?" The man smirked. "Namesley, I'm Zhang's cousin." A murmur rippled through the students. Xia's eyes narrowed slightly, but her posture remained relaxed. "I see. And what do you want?" Li crossed his arms over his chest. "I've heard a lot about you, about how you think you're some sort of kung fu master. But I'm here to tell you, beating up a few punks doesn't make you tough. You got lucky." Xia remained silent, waiting for him to continue. Li's smirk widened as he took a step closer. "I'm challenging you, Xia. You and me, one-on-one. Let's see if you're as good as everyone says, or if you're just a scared little girl hiding behind her reputation." The students held their breath, looking at Xia, waiting for her response. But she didn't react the way they expected. She simply turned away, picking up her training staff and gesturing to her students. "Class is over for today," she said quietly, her voice firm but calm. The students hesitated, glancing between Li and Xia. Li, clearly irritated by her dismissal, stepped forward again. "Hey, I'm talking to you. Don't walk away from me." Xia paused, her back still turned to him. "If you want to prove something, then prove it to yourself. I have nothing to prove to you or anyone else." Li's face twisted with anger. "You coward! You're afraid to fight me." Xia turned back to him, her gaze as steady as ever. "No, I'm not afraid, but I've learned that fighting isn't always the answer." Li's sneer deepened. "Then you'll never be a real master." Xia met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. A true master knows when to fight and when not to. With that, she walked away, leaving Li fuming in the courtyard, his fists clenched at his sides. Despite Xia's refusal to engage with Li, his challenge stirred something in the community. Word spread quickly that Zhang's cousin had arrived to avenge him, and rumors swirled about a potential showdown between Li and Xia. People from nearby towns started showing up to Xia's classes, not to learn but to see if the rumors were true, if the mysterious kung fu master would finally face off against her challenger. Li didn't back down either. He started showing up outside Xia's training sessions, taunting her in front of her students, trying to provoke her into fighting. But Xia remained calm and collected, never rising to his bait. Instead, she focused on her students, continuing to teach them the principles of kung fu: discipline, control, and respect. However, the tension in the air was undeniable. Even Xia's students began to question why she wouldn't fight. Some of the older ones, especially those who admired her strength, began to wonder if she was afraid of Li. It was clear that he was a formidable fighter. His reputation as a street brawler preceded him, and some believed that Xia might be outmatched. One evening, as Xia was closing up her training hall, a small group of her students approached her. They looked nervous, shuffling their feet as they tried to find the right words. "Master Xia," one of the boys, Ming, began hesitantly. "Why won't you fight, Li? We know you're strong, but people are starting to doubt you. They think you're scared." Xia looked at them, her expression softening. She could see the concern in their eyes, the confusion. They were young, still learning, and they didn't fully understand the depth of what she was trying to teach them. "I'm not afraid of Li," Xia said gently, "but fighting isn't always the answer. Kung Fu isn't just about defeating your enemies. It's about understanding yourself, your limits, and your purpose. I could fight Li and win, but what would that prove? To you? To him? Fighting for the sake of pride only leads to more conflict. The students listened, but she could see that they were still struggling with the concept. Ming spoke up again. But if you don't fight, he'll keep coming after you. He won't stop until he gets what he wants. Xia sighed softly, understanding their fear. Then we wait, and when the time is right, I will face him, not out of anger, but out of necessity. It wasn't long before that necessity arrived. One night, as Xia walked home after training, she sensed someone following her. She knew who it was before even turning around. Li had grown tired of waiting. He was done with taunting her in public. Now, he was going to force her hand. Xia stopped in an empty alley, the moon casting long shadows on the cobblestone street. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting Li's as he stepped out of the darkness. His smirk was gone, replaced with a cold, determined expression. I gave you plenty of chances to face me, Xia, Li growled, but you kept running. Now, there's no one here to hide behind. Xia stood still, her hands relaxed at her sides. I never ran, Li. I chose not to fight. Well, you don't get to choose anymore. He lunged at her, his fist flying toward her face. But Xia was faster. She sidestepped his attack effortlessly, her body moving with the grace of a dancer. Li stumbled past her, momentarily off balance, but quickly regained his footing. He turned back, his eyes blazing with frustration. Fight me, he snarled, throwing another punch. Xia dodged again, her movements fluid and precise. She didn't counterattack. Not yet. She wanted to see how far he would go, how desperate he was to prove himself. Li kept coming, each attack more furious than the last. But no matter how hard he tried, Xia was always one step ahead. She moved like water, flowing around him, avoiding every strike with ease. It wasn't long before Li was panting, his movements growing sloppy and desperate. You can't beat me, Xia, he shouted, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. I'm stronger than you. Xia finally stopped moving, standing still as Li charged at her one last time. This time, she didn't dodge. Instead, she caught his fist in her hand, her grip like iron. You're not stronger, Xia said quietly, her voice calm but firm. You're just angry. With a single, swift motion, she twisted Li's arm behind his back, forcing him to the ground. He groaned in pain, his body collapsing under her control. Kung Fu isn't about anger or pride, Xia continued, her grip tightening. It's about balance, discipline, and knowing when to strike. Li struggled, but he couldn't break free. Xia held him there for a moment longer before releasing him and stepping back. Li stayed on the ground, breathing heavily, his pride shattered. Go home, Li, Xia said softly. This fight is over. Li left that night, broken but wiser. He never returned to challenge Xia again. The rumors of their confrontation spread quickly, but the truth was more powerful than any rumor. Xia had faced her greatest challenge, not through violence, but through wisdom and restraint. In the months that followed, Xia's school grew even larger. Her students, inspired by her strength and wisdom, became more dedicated to their training. They no longer saw Kung Fu as just a way to fight. They understood that it was a path to mastering oneself. Xia stood in the courtyard one evening, watching her students practice under the setting sun. She felt a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in a long time. The memory of Wei was still with her, but it no longer haunted her. She had found a way to honor him, not through vengeance, but through teaching, through guiding others to find their own strength. As the last rays of sunlight faded, Xia smiled. She had come a long way from the girl who had once been consumed by rage. Now, she was more than just a Kung Fu master. She was a beacon of strength, wisdom, and hope. And she knew, deep in her heart, that Wei would be proud. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more delightful stories.